Question 1. A behavior analyst is supervising an RBT who consistently forgets to record data immediately after a target behavior occurs, often waiting until the end of the session. Which ethical code element is most relevant to this situation? A. Reliance on scientific knowledge. 1. 0.1. B. Boundaries of competence. 1. 0.2. C. Maintaining competence through professional development. 1. 0.3. D. Timely and accurate data collection. 3. 0.6. BACB RBT Ethics Code 2.0. Answer D. Timely and accurate data collection. 3.0.6. BACB RBT Ethics Code 2.0. This question deals with ethical responsibilities, specifically regarding data collection. The keywords forgets to record data immediately and waiting until the end of the session point directly to issues with the timing and accuracy of data. While competence 1.0.2, 1.0.3 is broadly relevant to job performance, the RBT code specifically addresses the timeliness and accuracy of data. 3.0.6. Waiting until the end of the session compromises data accuracy because memory fades and details get lost. For example, if the RBT waits, they might misremember how many times a child requested a break. So remember this: good data is fresh data. Record it right away to keep it accurate, as the RBT ethics code requires. Question 2. During discrete trial training, DTT. A brief pause example, 1 to 5 seconds, between the consequence for one trial and the presentation of the discriminative stimulus. SD for the next trial is known as the A. Response latency. B. Interresponse time, IRT. C. Intertrial interval, ITI. D. Prompt delay. Answer C. Intertrial interval, ITI. This question tests your knowledge of the specific components within a discrete trial. The key phrase here is brief pause between the consequence for one trial and the SD for the next trial. This pause is specifically defined as the intertrial interval, ITI. It's different from response latency, time from SD to response, or IRT, time between two responses. The ITI serves as a moment to reset before the next learning opportunity begins. Think of it like the short break between questions in a quiz. It separates one learning moment from the next. Here's a tip. Inter means between, and trial refers to the learning unit in DTT. So, intertrial literally means between trials. Question 3. A behavior analyst designs an intervention where a student earns a token for every 5 math problems completed correctly. After earning 10 tokens, the student can exchange them for 15 minutes of free time. This is an example of A. A differential reinforcement of alternative behavior, DRA. Procedure. B. A non-contingent reinforcement, NCR, schedule. C. A token economy system. D. Shaping. Answer C. A token economy system. The scenario described involves key elements of a specific behavior change system. The keywords are earns a token, exchange them, and free time, which acts as a backup reinforcer. This setup, where symbolic items, tokens, are earned for target behaviors and later exchanged for preferred items or activities, defines a token economy. It's not DRA because it doesn't explicitly mention reducing a problem behavior by reinforcing an alternative. It's not NCR because reinforcement, tokens, is contingent on behavior, completing problems. Shaping involves reinforcing successive approximations, which isn't described here. For example, many classrooms use star charts where stars, tokens, are earned for good behavior and traded for prizes. Backup reinforcers, remember. If you see tokens being earned and exchanged, think token economy. Question 4. Which of the following measurement procedures would be most appropriate for recording the behavior of on task during a 30-minute classroom observation where the behavior may fluctuate frequently? A. Event recording. B. Duration recording. C. Momentary time sampling. D. Latency recording. Answer: C. Momentary time sampling. This question asks you to select the best measurement method for a continuous behavior, on task, within a set observation period. The keywords are on task, 30-minute classroom observation, and fluctuate frequently. Event recording counts instances, which isn't ideal for a continuous state like on task. Duration recording measures total time, which could be cumbersome if it fluctuates often. Latency measures time to start, which doesn't fit. Momentary time sampling involves checking if the behavior is occurring at the exact moment. The interval ends example checking every 2 minutes if the student is on task right then. This is efficient for continuous behaviors that come and go. For instance, you'd set a timer for 2 minutes, and when it goes off, you glance at the student and mark yes or no for on task at that instant. Here's the tip. For ongoing behaviors where you just need a snapshot estimate, momentary time sampling is often your go-to. Question 5. A child screams whenever their mother is on the phone. The mother usually ends the phone call quickly when the child screams. The most likely function of the child's screaming behavior is A. Access to tangibles. B. Escape/avoidance. C. Automatic reinforcement. D. Attention. Answer: D. Attention. This question asks you to identify the likely reason or function behind a behavior based on the environmental events surrounding it. The key information is that the screaming happens whenever their mother is on the phone, and the mother usually ends the phone call quickly as a result. While ending the call might seem like escape for the mother, the child's behavior results in the mother stopping her phone activity and, implicitly, directing her attention back to the child, even if it's negative attention. Access to tangibles isn't mentioned. Escape isn't relevant for the child. They aren't escaping a task. And automatic reinforcement means the behavior itself feels good, which is less likely here than seeking parental interaction. Imagine the child is bored or wants interaction. Screaming effectively gets the mother off the phone and focused back on them. Remember, look at what happens right after the behavior. That often reveals the function. If the consequence is interaction or focus from another person, suspect attention. Question 6. Which experimental design involves the rapid alternation of 2 or more conditions, example, baseline and intervention, across sessions? A. Reversal, ABAB design. B. Multiple baseline design. C. Changing criterion design. D. Alternating treatments, multi-element design. Answer: D. Alternating treatments, multi-element design. This question asks you to identify a specific single-subject research design based on its defining characteristic. The crucial phrase is rapid alternation of 2 or more conditions across sessions. This precisely describes an alternating treatments design, also called multi-element design. Unlike a reversal design, which implements one condition for a block of time before switching, or multiple baseline, which introduces the intervention at different times across baselines, or changing criterion, which changes the performance goal over time. The alternating treatments design quickly switches between conditions, sometimes even within the same session. For example, you might use a sticker chart, condition A. On Monday, verbal praise only, condition B. On Tuesday, back to stickers on Wednesday, praise on Thursday, etc., to see which one works better faster. The key takeaway is rapid alternation points directly to the alternating treatments design. Question 7. Generalization occurs when A. A behavior occurs only in the presence of the specific discriminative stimulus, SD. It was trained with. B. A behavior learned under one condition begins to occur in other conditions or settings. C. The frequency of a behavior decreases after reinforcement is withheld. D. An individual learns to distinguish between 2 different stimuli. Answer: B. A behavior learned under one condition begins to occur in other conditions or settings. This question defines the concept of generalization. The key idea is the spreading of behavior effects. Generalization means that a skill or behavior learned in a specific training situation, like saying thank you to a therapist for a toy, starts happening in other situations, saying thank you to mom and home for a snack, or with different stimuli, saying thank you when receiving a gift, without direct training in those new situations. Option A describes discrimination, Option C describes extinction, and Option D describes stimulus discrimination. For example, teaching a child to identify the color red on flashcards, training setting, and then seeing them correctly point out a red car on the street, different setting/stimulus, shows generalization. Here's the tip. Think of generalization as the skill going general, moving beyond the specific training context. Question 8. Reinforcing successive approximations toward a terminal behavior is known as A. Chaining, B. Shaping, C. Modeling, D. Fading. Answer B. Shaping. This question asks for the term that describes a specific behavior change process. The defining phrase is reinforcing successive approximations toward a terminal behavior. This is the textbook definition of shaping. Shaping involves rewarding small steps that get closer and closer to the final desired behavior until that behavior is achieved. It's different from chaining, linking steps already in the repertoire, modeling, demonstrating, or fading, gradually removing prompts. For instance, to teach a child to say bubble, you might first reinforce any sound, then ba, then bub, and finally the full word bubble. Each step is a closer approximation. Remember, shaping shapes a new behavior out of existing ones by rewarding baby steps. Question 9. A functional behavior assessment, FBA, indicates that a student's disruptive behavior, example talking out, is maintained by peer attention. Which intervention would be considered function-based? A. Providing the student with a preferred activity contingent on quiet sitting. B. Teaching the student appropriate ways to gain peer attention, example asking to join a game, and reinforcing those behaviors. C. Placing the student in timeout whenever they talk out. D. Ignoring the talking out behavior entirely. Answer B. Teaching the student appropriate ways to gain peer attention, example asking to join a game, and reinforcing those behaviors. This question connects FBA results to intervention design, emphasizing the importance of matching the intervention to the behavior's function. The key information is that the behavior is maintained by peer attention, meaning the student does it to get their friends to notice them. A function-based intervention directly addresses this identified function. Option B does exactly this. It teaches a replacement behavior, appropriate ways to get peer attention, that serves the same function, getting peer attention, in a better way. Option A uses a preferred activity, which might work but doesn't directly address the peer attention function. Option C, timeout, removes attention but doesn't teach a replacement skill. Option D, ignoring, might be part of an extinction plan, but without teaching a replacement, it can be ineffective or unethical. Think of it this way. If the kid wants peer attention, teach them a good way to get it. That's a function-based solution. Question 10. An operational definition of a behavior should be A. Broad and subjective. B. Objective, clear, and complete. C. Focused only on the topography of the behavior. D. Based on the presumed function of the behavior. Answer B. Objective, clear, and complete. This question asks about the necessary qualities of a good operational definition. An operational definition tells us exactly what the behavior looks like, so anyone can measure it consistently. The keywords here are objective, clear, and complete. Objective means it's based on observable events, not feelings or guesses. Clear means it's unambiguous and easily understood. Complete means it defines the boundaries, what is and is not an instance of the behavior, while topography, what it looks like, is important, the definition needs more than just that, like intensity or duration sometimes. Basing it only on presumed function is incorrect. The definition should describe the behavior itself. For example, instead of aggression, a good operational definition might be any instance of forcefully hitting, kicking, or pushing another person with any part of the body. Key takeaway: good definitions are like good recipes, clear, specific, and leaving no room for guessing. Question 11. What type of graph is most commonly used in ABA to display data collected over time, allowing for visual analysis of trends, levels, and variability? A. Bar graph. B. Scatter plot. C. Line graph. D. Pie chart. Answer: C. Line graph. This question asks about the standard graphical display used in applied behavior analysis. The keywords display data collected over time and visual analysis of trends, levels, and variability strongly point towards a line graph. Line graphs excel at showing how behavior changes across sessions or days, the passage of time, making it easy to see if the behavior is increasing, upward trend, decreasing, downward trend, staying stable, level, or bouncing around, variability. Bar graphs are better for comparing discrete categories. Scatter plots show correlations between two variables, and pie charts show parts of a whole. In ABA, tracking progress on goals like reducing tantrums or increasing skill acquisition almost always involves plotting data points over time on a line graph. Remember, time series data in ABA usually goes on a line graph. Question 12. Differential reinforcement of other behavior. DRO involves delivering reinforcement. A. When the target problem behavior has not occurred for a specific period. B. When an alternative, appropriate behavior occurs. C. When the behavior occurs at a lower rate than before. D. Only after a certain number of responses have occurred. Answer: A. When the target problem behavior has not occurred for a specific period. This question tests your understanding of DRO, a specific differential reinforcement procedure. The defining characteristic of DRO is reinforcing the absence of the problem behavior. The key phrase is "has not occurred for a specific period." Reinforcement is delivered contingent on the emission of the target behavior during a set interval or at a specific moment. Option B describes DRA/DRI, Option C describes DRL, and Option D describes a ratio schedule. For example, if a child typically hits others frequently, you might set a timer for 5 minutes. If they go the entire 5 minutes without hitting, they get a reinforcer. The O in DRO can stand for other behavior, but it's often easier to think of it as omission, reinforcing the omission of the problem behavior. Question 13. Which of the following best describes stimulus control? A. The tendency for behavior to occur more frequently in the presence of a specific stimulus, SD, because it has been reinforced in the past in the presence of that stimulus. B. The process of gradually removing prompts. C. The weakening of behavior when reinforcement is withdrawn. D. The unpleasant stimulus that decreases behavior. Answer: A. The tendency for behavior to occur more frequently in the presence of a specific stimulus, SD, because it has been reinforced in the past in the presence of that stimulus. This question asks for the definition of stimulus control. The core concept is how environmental stimuli influence behavior due to past learning. Option A captures this perfectly. Behavior happens more often under certain conditions, in the presence of the SD, because reinforcement was previously available under those conditions. Option B is fading, Option C is extinction, and Option D describes a punisher. A classic example is a phone ringing, SD. You are more likely to pick it up, behavior, when it rings because doing so has been reinforced in the past. Connecting with someone. The ringing sound exerts stimulus control over the answering behavior. Think of it like this. The stimulus, SD, acts like a signal or cue that reinforcement is available for a specific behavior. Question 14. During a functional analysis, FA, conditions are systematically manipulated to test the potential function of a problem behavior. If a behavior occurs most frequently during the alone condition, what is the hypothesized function? A. Escape/avoidance. B. Attention. C. Access to tangibles. D. Automatic reinforcement. Answer D. Automatic reinforcement. This question tests your understanding of interpreting functional analysis results. The key piece of information is that the behavior is highest in the alone condition. In a standard FA, the alone condition means the individual is in a room by themselves with no tasks, attention, or preferred items readily available. If the problem behavior persists or increases in this condition, it suggests the behavior itself produces its own reinforcement. It feels good, relieves pain, or is inherently satisfying, independent of social consequences. Escape is tested in the demand condition, attention in the attention condition, and tangibles in the tangible condition. For example, self-stimulatory behaviors like rocking or hand flapping might occur most often when the person is alone, suggesting an automatic function. Remember, alone condition high equals suspect automatic reinforcement. Question 15. Providing a prompt that makes the correct response most likely to occur, such as pointing directly to the correct picture card, is an example of what type of prompt? A. Verbal prompt. B. Gestural prompt. C. Physical prompt. D. Stimulus prompt. Answer D. Stimulus prompt. This question asks you to classify a specific type of prompt. The key action is pointing directly to the correct picture card. This action modifies the stimulus itself, the array of cards, to make the correct one more salient or obvious. This falls under the category of stimulus prompts, which act directly on the antecedent stimulus. Verbal prompts involve spoken words. Gestural prompts involve movements like pointing towards something but not altering the stimulus itself, like pointing to the correct card from a distance. And physical prompts involve guiding the learner's body, because the pointing alters the stimulus array by highlighting the correct card within the array. It's best classified as a stimulus prompt. Specifically, a positional prompt is a type of stimulus prompt. Quick tip: if the hint changes the task stimulus itself, like making the right answer bigger, closer, or pointed at, it's likely a stimulus prompt. Question 16. A behavior analyst is asked to consult on a feeding program for a child with severe food selectivity. The analyst has never worked on feeding problems before. According to the BCBA ethics code, what is the analyst's primary responsibility? A. Accept the case and learn about feeding interventions through research and workshops. B. Accept the case but immediately refer to a specialist after the initial meeting. C. Decline the case, explaining it is outside their current area of competence, and provide appropriate referrals. D. Accept the case but disclose their lack of experience to the family. Answer C. Decline the case, explaining it is outside their current area of competence, and provide appropriate referrals. This question pertains to ethical boundaries and professional competence. The critical information is that the analyst has never worked on feeding problems before, and these can be complex and carry health risks. The BCBA ethics code, specifically Boundaries of Competence 1.02, requires behavior analysts to practice only within their areas of defined competence, based on education, training, and supervised experience. While professional development 1.03 is encouraged, taking on a complex, potentially high-risk case like severe feeding disorders without prior competence is unethical. Declining and referring to a qualified professional is the most ethical course of action. Simply disclosing lack of experience isn't enough if you lack the fundamental competence. Ethics first. If it's outside your expertise, especially in high-stakes areas, refer out. Question 17. Punishment is defined by its effect on behavior. A stimulus acts as a punisher if, when presented contingently after a behavior, it A. Causes physical pain or discomfort. B. Is disliked by the individual. C. Decreases the future probability of that behavior occurring. D. Temporarily stops the behavior from occurring. Answer: C. Decreases the future probability of that behavior occurring. This question asks for the technical definition of punishment in behavior analysis. The crucial part of the definition is the effect on future behavior. Punishment is defined functionally, meaning we only know if something is a punisher if it makes the behavior less likely to happen again in the future. Whether it causes pain, A, or is disliked, B, is irrelevant to the technical definition, though often correlated. Temporarily stopping the behavior, D, is insufficient. The effect must be on future probability. For example, if saying no after a child hits makes them less likely to hit in the future, then no functioned as a punisher in that instance, regardless of whether the child seemed upset by it. Remember the golden rule. Reinforcement increases future behavior, punishment decreases future behavior. It's all about the future. Question 18. You are teaching a child to tie their shoes using a backward chaining procedure. Which step would you teach first? A. Making the first knot. B. Creating the loops, bunny ears. C. Crossing the loops. D. Pulling the loops tight to finish the knot. Answer: D. Pulling the loops tight to finish the knot. This question tests your understanding of backward chaining. The keyword backward tells you the teaching sequence starts with the last step of the behavioral chain. In backward chaining, the therapist typically completes all the initial steps, and the learner performs only the final step to complete the task and receive reinforcement. Once the last step is mastered, the learner is taught the second to last step, then the third to last, and so on, working backward from the end result. For tying shoes, the very last action is pulling the loops tight. Therefore, in backward chaining, this is the step taught first. Think of it like this. Backward chaining lets the learner finish the job and get the reward right away, which can be very motivating. Question 19. Which of the following is not considered one of the 7 dimensions of applied behavior analysis, as described by Baer, Wolf, and Risley, 1968? A. Applied. B. Behavioral. C. Analytic. D. Evidence-based. Answer: D. Evidence-based. This question asks you to identify which option is not one of the original 7 dimensions that define ABA. The 7 dimensions are applied, behavioral, analytic, technological, conceptually systematic, effective, and generality, often remembered by the acronym GETSCAB. Evidence-based is a related and important concept in modern practice, signifying that interventions should be supported by scientific research, but it was not one of the original 7 dimensions outlined by Baer, Wolf, and Risley in their seminal 1968 article. While ABA is evidence-based, the term itself isn't one of those foundational 7 dimensions. Quick tip: memorize the GETSCAB acronym to easily recall the 7 dimensions. Question 20. Measuring the time between the end of one response and the beginning of the next response is known as A. Latency. B. Duration. C. Interresponse time, IRT. D. Rate. Answer: C. Interresponse time, IRT. This question asks for the specific term for measuring the time between 2 consecutive instances of a behavior. The keywords are time between the end of one response and the beginning of the next. This is the definition of interresponse time, IRT. Latency is the time from a stimulus to the start of the response. Duration is how long a single response lasts. Rate is the frequency over time. For example, if a student taps their pencil, stops for 3 seconds, and then taps it again, the IRT between the taps is 3 seconds. Remember, inter means between, so IRT is the time between responses. Question 21. A behavior analyst observes that a client consistently engages in hand-flapping behavior when no demands are placed, and when left alone, This behavior does not seem to result in any social consequences. A possible hypothesis for the function is A. Escape from demands. B. Gaining attention from staff. C. Accessing preferred tangible items. D. Automatic reinforcement. Answer D. Automatic reinforcement. This scenario provides clues about the function of hand flapping by describing the conditions under which it occurs. The keywords are when no demands are placed and when left alone, plus the observation that it doesn't produce any social consequences, like attention or tangibles. Since the behavior happens without social triggers or results, it suggests the reinforcement comes directly from the behavior itself. It might feel good, be calming, or provide sensory input. This is known as automatic reinforcement, sometimes called sensory reinforcement. Escape is unlikely because no demands are present. Attention and tangibles are unlikely because the behavior occurs when alone and doesn't seem to lead to social interaction or item access. Think. If the behavior happens when the person is alone and doesn't get them anything from others, it's likely automatically reinforcing. Question 22. Which statement best describes experimental control in the context of ABA? A. Ensuring the client agrees with the intervention plan. B. Demonstrating a functional relation between the independent variable, intervention, and the dependent variable, behavior. C. Using only evidence-based practices approved by the BCBA. D. Controlling all aspects of the client's environment during sessions. Answer B. Demonstrating a functional relation between the independent variable, intervention, and the dependent variable, behavior. This question asks about the meaning of experimental control, a core principle in the analytic dimension of ABA. Experimental control refers to reliably showing that the change in the target behavior, dependent variable, was indeed caused by the intervention, independent variable, that the behavior analyst implemented and not by some other factor. This is achieved through systematic manipulation within single subject designs, like reversal or multiple baseline. Option A relates to consent, C relates to evidence-based practice, and D is an overstatement about environmental control. Demonstrating experimental control means proving your intervention caused the behavior change. Think of it as proving cause and effect between what you did, intervention, and what happened, behavior change. Question 23. Gradually reducing the strength or intrusiveness of a prompt is called A. Shaping. B. Chaining. C. Fading. D. Discrimination training. Answer C. Fading. This question asks for the term describing the gradual removal of assistance during teaching. The keywords gradually reducing the strength or intrusiveness of a prompt define the process of fading. Fading is used to transfer stimulus control from the prompt to the natural stimulus, SD, ensuring the learner can eventually perform the skill independently. Shaping reinforces approximations of behavior, chaining links behaviors, and discrimination training teaches responding differently to different stimuli. For example, if you initially used full physical guidance to help a child write their name, you might fade to light touch guidance, then to a gestural prompt, pointing, and finally to just the verbal instruction. Remember, fading is like letting go, gradually removing support so the learner can stand on their own. Question 24. A teacher provides praise to a student only when they raise their hand quietly and ignores them when they call out. This is an example of A. Differential reinforcement of incompatible behavior, DRI. B. Differential reinforcement of alternative behavior, DRA. C. Non-contingent reinforcement, NCR. D. Differential reinforcement of low rates, DRL. Answer B. Differential reinforcement of alternative behavior, DRA. This question describes a scenario involving reinforcement for one behavior and extinction for another. The teacher reinforces raising hand quietly, the alternative behavior, and ignores calling out, the problem behavior. This fits the definition of DRA. Reinforcing inappropriate alternative behavior while withholding reinforcement, ignoring, in this case, for the problem behavior. It could potentially be DRI if raising a hand and calling out were physically incompatible, impossible to do at the exact same time. But DRI is a broader category that fits well here, as raising hand is an alternative to calling out. NCR involves time-based reinforcement, and DRL involves reinforcing lower rates of the problem behavior itself. Key here is reinforcing a specific replacement behavior. Tip: DRI teaches what to do instead of the problem behavior. Question 25. Which assessment method involves direct observation of the client's behavior in their natural environment without manipulating variables? A. Functional analysis, FA. B. Anecdotal recording, ABC data. C. Preference assessment. D. Standardized testing. Answer: B. Anecdotal recording, ABC data. This question asks about assessment methods, focusing on direct observation in the natural setting. The key elements are direct observation, natural environment, and without manipulating variables. Anecdotal recording, often structured as antecedent behavior consequence, ABC. Data collection fits this description perfectly. It involves observing the behavior as it naturally occurs and recording what happened just before, A. The behavior itself, B. And what happened right after, C. Functional analysis, A. Involves manipulating variables. Preference assessments, C. Involve presenting stimuli to gauge preference. Standardized testing, D. Is typically indirect and norm-referenced. ABC data gives you a descriptive snapshot of the behavior in its usual context. Remember, ABC data is about describing what you see naturally, not experimenting. Question 26. The applied dimension of ABA. Bear, Wolf, and Risley, 1968, means that the behaviors targeted for change are: A. Easily measurable and observable. B. Relevant to basic research principles. C. Socially significant and important to the individual and society. D. Amenable to change using behavioral techniques. Answer: C. Socially significant and important to the individual and society. This question asks you to define the applied dimension of ABA. This dimension emphasizes that ABA should focus on behaviors that matter, those that improve the day-to-day life of the individual and are valued by them and their community. The keyword is socially significant, while measurability, part of the behavioral dimension, and amenability to change are important. The applied dimension specifically concerns the relevance and importance of the target behavior. Basic research principles relate more to the conceptually systematic dimension. For example, teaching communication skills, social skills, or daily living skills are considered applied because they enhance a person's quality of life and independence. Takeaway: applied means focusing on behaviors that make a real, positive difference in people's lives. Question 27. A contingency refers to: A. The schedule on which reinforcement is delivered. B. The dependent relationship between a behavior and its consequences or antecedents. C. A detailed description of the intervention plan. D. The process of breaking down a skill into smaller steps. Answer: B. The dependent relationship between a behavior and its consequences or antecedents. This question asks for the definition of a contingency. In behavior analysis, a contingency describes the if-then relationship between events. Most commonly, it refers to the relationship between a behavior and its consequence. If the behavior occurs, then a specific consequence follows. It can also refer to the relationship between an antecedent, behavior, and consequence, the three-term contingency. SD greater than R greater than SR plus. The schedule, A, is part of specifying the contingency, but not the definition itself. C describes the plan, and D describes a task analysis. For example, if you finish your homework, behavior, then you can watch TV. Consequence describes a positive reinforcement contingency. Remember, contingency equals consequence depends on behavior. Question 28. Which of the following is an example of negative reinforcement? A. Giving a child a sticker for cleaning their room. B. Taking away a chore when a child completes their homework. C. Scolding a child for running in the house. D. Ignoring a child's whining. Answer: B. Taking away a chore when a child completes their homework. This question asks you to identify an example of negative reinforcement. Negative reinforcement involves removing an aversive, unpleasant stimulus contingent on a behavior, which leads to an increase in the future likelihood of that behavior. The keyword is taking away. In option B, the aversive stimulus is the chore, and it is removed, taken away, when the homework, behavior, is completed. This makes completing homework more likely in the future. Option A is positive reinforcement, adding a sticker. Option C is positive punishment, adding a scolding. Option D is extinction, withholding attention. Think of it like this. Negative reinforcement is about escape or avoidance. The behavior gets you out of something bad, so you do it more often. Question 29. What is the primary purpose of conducting a task analysis? A. To determine the function of a problem behavior. B. To identify the steps required to complete a complex skill. C. To assess an individual's preferences for various stimuli. D. To measure the rate of a specific behavior over time. Answer: B. To identify the steps required to complete a complex skill. This question asks about the main goal of a task analysis. The core concept is breaking down complex tasks. A task analysis involves identifying and listing all the smaller sequential steps that make up a larger skill, like brushing teeth, making a sandwich, or logging into a computer. This breakdown is essential for teaching complex skills, often using chaining procedures. It's not used for determining function, that's FBA, assessing preferences, preference assessment, or measuring rate, that requires frequency counts over time. For example, a task analysis for hand washing would list steps like turn on water, wet hands, get soap, rub hands, rinse hands, turn off water, dry hands. Takeaway. Task analysis equals breaking big skills into small, teachable steps. Question 30. Which ethical consideration is most centrally related to ensuring that an intervention is likely to be successful and results in meaningful behavior change? A. Maintaining confidentiality. 2. 08. B. Avoiding harmful reinforcers. 2. 12. C. Effectiveness of treatment. 2. 15. D. Obtaining informed consent. 3. 03 RBT Code 2. 0. Answer: C. Effectiveness of treatment. 2. 15. This question asks about the ethical principle focused on the success and meaningfulness of interventions. The keywords likely to be successful and meaningful behavior change directly relate to the ethical code element concerning treatment effectiveness, or similar wording depending on the specific code version. E. Ch. Evaluating effectiveness. Behavior analysts have an ethical obligation to use procedures that have been demonstrated to be effective, monitor their effects, and make changes if the intervention isn't working or producing socially significant outcomes. While confidentiality, avoiding harm, and consent are all crucial ethical considerations, the principle specifically addressing the success and impact of the intervention itself is effectiveness. Think. Ethically, we must strive to use interventions that actually work and make a positive difference. Question 31. Response prompts operate on the blank, while stimulus prompts operate on the blank. A. Consequence, behavior. B. Behavior, antecedent stimulus. C. Antecedent stimulus, consequence. D. Behavior, function. Answer: B. Behavior, antecedent stimulus. This question differentiates between two major categories of prompts based on what they act upon. Response prompts are cues or assistants added after the antecedent stimulus, SD, but before or during the response, guiding the learner's behavior directly. Example, verbal instructions, modeling, physical guidance. Stimulus prompts involve modifying the antecedent stimulus before the response occurs to make the correct response more likely. Example, making the correct item bigger, changing its color, adding a textual cue near it. So, response prompts act on response behavior, while stimulus prompts act on the antecedent stimulus. For example, telling someone, turn left. Verbal response prompt acts on their behavior while putting a large arrow pointing left. Stimulus prompt acts on the stimulus environment. Remember, response prompts help the response. Stimulus prompts change the stimulus. Question 32. A scatterplot analysis is most useful for identifying A. The specific function of a behavior. B. The correlation between a behavior and specific times of day or activities. C. The overall rate of a behavior across weeks. D. The sequence of antecedents, behaviors, and consequences. Answer B. The correlation between a behavior and specific times of day or activities. This question asks about the primary use of a scatterplot in behavioral assessment. A scatterplot is a grid used to plot occurrences of behavior against time intervals throughout the day or across activities. Its main purpose is to visually identify patterns or correlations, to see if the behavior happens more often during certain times, like mornings vs. afternoons, or during specific activities, like math class vs. recess. While this pattern might suggest hypotheses about function, example, behavior occurs only during difficult tasks, suggesting escape, the scatterplot itself shows correlation, not definitive function. Rate across weeks is better shown on a line graph, and sequences are captured by ABC data. Think. Scatterplot equals scattering data points across time/activities to find patterns. Question 33. Which of the following is an example of a conditioned reinforcer? A. Food when hungry. B. Water when thirsty. C. Money. D. Warmth when cold. Answer C. Money. This question asks you to identify a conditioned reinforcer. Conditioned reinforcers are stimuli that acquire reinforcing properties because they have been paired or associated with other reinforcers, either primary/unconditioned or other conditioned reinforcers. Money has no inherent biological value, but becomes reinforcing because it can be exchanged for many other desired things. Food, items, activities. Food, water, and warmth are examples of unconditioned reinforcers. They are naturally reinforcing because they satisfy biological needs without prior learning. For example, praise, tokens, and good grades are also conditioned reinforcers because their value is learned through association. Key takeaway. Conditioned equals learned value. Unconditioned equals natural value. Question 34. The technological dimension of ABA. Bear, Wolf, and Risley, 1968, means that procedures are A. Based on principles of behavior analysis. B. Demonstrated to be effective through data analysis. C. Described clearly and completely so they can be replicated. D. Focused on socially important behaviors. Answer C. Described clearly and completely so they can be replicated. This question asks for the definition of the technological dimension of ABA. This dimension emphasizes the importance of writing out procedures with sufficient detail and clarity that another trained person could read the description and implement the procedure exactly as intended, i.e., replicated. It's like writing a good recipe. All steps and ingredients are listed precisely. Option A relates to conceptually systematic, B relates to effective and analytic, and D relates to applied. If a behavior plan says implement DRO, it's not technological unless it specifies the interval, the reinforcer, how it's delivered, etc. Remember, technological equals written like a detailed instruction manual. Question 35. An RBT is teaching a client to mand, request for juice. When the client says "Jew," the RBT gives them juice. This is an example of reinforcing. A. A fully correct mand. B. An approximation of the mand. C. Attacked. D. An intraverbal. Answer B. An approximation of the mand. This scenario involves teaching verbal behavior, specifically requesting manding. The client says Jew instead of the full word juice. By providing juice immediately following this utterance, the RBT is reinforcing an approximation of the target behavior. This is a common strategy in shaping verbal behavior, accepting and reinforcing attempts that are closer to the final form. A fully correct mand would be juice, or perhaps juice please. Attacked is a label example seeing juice and saying juice, and an intraverbal is like conversational fill-in-the-blanks example hearing you drink, and saying juice. Here, the key is that Jew is a step towards the full word, making it an approximation. Think. Shaping often involves reinforcing these close enough attempts initially. Question 36. In a multiple baseline design across settings, the intervention is introduced. A. To all settings at the same time. B. Sequentially across the different settings after baseline stability is achieved in each. C. Alternating rapidly between settings. D. To one setting, then removed, then reintroduced. Answer B. Sequentially across the different settings after baseline stability is achieved in each. This question asks how an intervention is implemented in a specific type of multiple baseline design. The keywords are multiple baseline design across settings and intervention is introduced. The defining feature of any multiple baseline design is the staggered or sequential introduction of the intervention across different baselines, which could be different behaviors, settings, or subjects. After collecting stable baseline data in all settings, the intervention is applied in the first setting, while baseline continues in the others. Once behavior change is observed in the first setting, the intervention is introduced in the second setting, and so on. This demonstrates experimental control if the behavior changes only when the intervention is applied in that specific setting. Option A defeats the purpose, C describes alternating treatments, and D describes a reversal. Key: multiple baseline equals staggered start. Question 37. The extent to which observers consistently agree on the occurrences and non-occurrences of observed behaviors is known as A. Treatment fidelity. B. Reliability. C. Inter-observer agreement, IOA. D. Validity. Answer C. Inter-observer agreement, IOA. This question defines a specific type of measurement quality check. The crucial phrase is observers consistently agree on the occurrences and non-occurrences of observed behaviors. This is the definition of inter-observer agreement, IOA. IOA measures the degree to which two or more independent observers report the same values after measuring the same events. High IOA increases confidence that the behavior was measured accurately and objectively. Treatment fidelity refers to implementing the intervention correctly. Reliability is a broader measurement term, consistency. And validity asks if we are measuring what we intend to measure. For example, if two observers watch a video and both count 5 instances of hitting, their IOA is high for that behavior. Tip: IOA is about agreement between observers. Question 38. Which schedule of reinforcement typically produces a scallop pattern of responding, where behavior increases towards the end of the interval? A. Fixed ratio, FR. B. Variable ratio, VR. C. Fixed interval, FI. D. Variable interval, VI. Answer C. Fixed interval, FI. This question asks about response patterns associated with basic reinforcement schedules. The scallop pattern, a pause after reinforcement, followed by a gradual increase in responding as the end of the interval approaches, is characteristic of a fixed interval, FI, schedule. On an FI schedule, reinforcement is delivered for the first response after a fixed amount of time has passed. Animals and humans learn this contingency and often stop responding right after reinforcement and then increase responding as the time for the next available reinforcer gets closer. FR produces high rates with post-reinforcement pauses, VR produces high steady rates, and VI produces moderate steady rates. Think. Phi equals fixed time equals predictable equals pause then accelerate. Scallop. Question 39. A behavior is more likely to occur in the presence of a specific antecedent stimulus, the SD, and less likely to occur in the presence of another stimulus, the S delta, due to a history of differential reinforcement. This phenomenon is called A. Generalization, B. Maintenance, C. Stimulus discrimination, D. Response differentiation. Answer C. Stimulus discrimination. This question describes a fundamental behavioral process involving responding differently to different stimuli. The keywords are more likely with one stimulus, SD, and less likely with another, S delta. Because reinforcement was available with the SD but not the S delta, this is the definition of stimulus discrimination. Learning to tell the difference between stimuli that signal different consequences. Generalization is responding similarly to different stimuli. Maintenance is behavior persisting over time. Response differentiation relates to shaping, where different forms of a response are reinforced differentially. For example, a child learns to ask for cookies, behavior, when mom is smiling, SD, but not when she is frowning, S delta, because requests are only granted when she smiles. Tip. Discrimination equals telling the difference between stimuli. Question 40. An RBT is working with a client who engages in frequent property destruction. The supervising BCBA instructs the RBT to implement an extinction procedure by ignoring the behavior. However, the behavior temporarily increases in frequency and intensity before it starts to decrease. This temporary increase is known as A. Spontaneous recovery, B. Resurgence, C. Extinction burst, D. Response variation. Answer C. Extinction burst. This question describes a common phenomenon observed when implementing extinction. The key information is that the behavior temporarily increases in frequency and intensity after the extinction procedure, ignoring, starts, but before the behavior begins to decrease. This temporary worsening of behavior is called an extinction burst. It's a predictable side effect and important to anticipate so the plan isn't abandoned prematurely. Spontaneous recovery is the reappearance of the behavior after it has decreased. Resurgence is the recurrence of a previously reinforced behavior when another behavior is put on extinction. Response variation means trying different behaviors. Think. The behavior bursts out one last time, trying harder to get the reinforcement that used to follow. Question 41. Which of the following is the best example of measuring behavior using a duration recording method? A. Counting the number of times a student gets out of their seat. B. Recording how long it takes for a student to start their work after the instruction is given. C. Measuring the total amount of time a student spends engaging in tantrum behavior during a session. D. Noting whether a student is reading or not at the end of each 5-minute interval. Answer C. Measuring the total amount of time a student spends engaging in tantrum behavior during a session. This question asks you to identify an example of duration recording. Duration recording measures how long a behavior lasts from start to finish. Option C, measuring the total time spent tantruming, is a direct application of duration recording. Option A is frequency/event recording. Option B is latency recording. Option D is momentary time sampling. For example, if a tantrum starts at 5 a.m. and ends at 10 a.m., the duration is 5 minutes. If another occurs from 10:30 to 10:32, the duration is 2 minutes. Total duration for the session would be 7 minutes. Remember, duration equals how long it lasts. Question 42. When selecting behaviors for change, behavior analysts should prioritize behaviors that A. Are easiest to change quickly. B. Will increase access to reinforcement in the natural environment. C. Are most interesting from a research perspective. D. The behavior analyst has prior experience with. Answer: B. Will increase access to reinforcement in the natural environment. This question addresses the ethical and practical considerations in target behavior selection, linking back to the applied dimension and the concept of social significance. While ease of change, A, and analyst experience, D, are practical factors, the primary consideration should be the benefit to the client. Behaviors that increase access to naturally occurring reinforcement, like improved social skills leading to more friendships or communication skills allowing needs to be met, are often the most meaningful and sustainable. This principle is sometimes called the relevance of behavior rule. Option C focuses on research interests, not client benefit. Think. Choose target behaviors that will open doors for the client in their everyday life. Question 43. Using instructions, modeling, rehearsal, and feedback to teach a new skill is characteristic of which teaching procedure? A. Shaping. B. Discrete trial training, DTT. C. Behavioral skills training, BST. D. Incidental teaching. Answer: C. Behavioral skills training, BST. This question asks you to identify a specific training package based on its components. The combination of instructions, modeling, rehearsal, practice, and feedback is the definition of behavioral skills training, BST. BST is a highly effective method for teaching various skills, especially social, communication, and safety skills. Shaping involves reinforcing approximations. DTT is a structured teaching format with distinct trials. Incidental teaching uses naturally occurring opportunities. For example, to teach someone how to politely interrupt, you would first instruct them on when and how to do it, then model it, have them rehearse it in a role play, and provide feedback on their performance. Tip: remember the acronym INMRF, or sometimes SIRF. Instructions, model, rehearse, feedback for the steps of BST. Question 44. A motivating operation, MO, that increases the reinforcing effectiveness of a stimulus and evokes behavior that has produced that stimulus in the past is called: A. An establishing operation, EO. B. An abolishing operation, AO. C. A discriminative stimulus, SD. D. An unconditioned stimulus, US. Answer: A. An establishing operation, EO. This question defines one type of motivating operation based on its two effects. Motivating operations alter the value of reinforcers and change the likelihood of behaviors related to those reinforcers. An establishing operation, EO, specifically increases the value of a reinforcer, makes you want it more, and evokes behaviors that have previously obtained that reinforcer. The keywords are increases the reinforcing effectiveness and evokes behavior. An abolishing operation, AO, does the opposite, decreases value and abates behavior. In SD signals availability, it doesn't alter value. In US is a stimulus that naturally elicits a response. For example, being deprived of water, EO, increases the value of water as a reinforcer and makes you more likely to ask for water or go get some. Remember, establishing operations equals establish value equals evoke behavior. Question 45. Transferring stimulus control from a prompted response to an unprompted response is the goal of A. Discrimination training, B. Prompt fading procedures, C. Shaping procedures, D. Functional communication training. Answer: B. Prompt fading procedures. This question asks about the purpose of a specific behavioral technique. The key phrase is transferring stimulus control from a prompted response to an unprompted response. This is the explicit goal of prompt fading. We use prompts initially to help the learner succeed, but the aim is always to gradually remove those prompts so that the natural stimulus, SDE, alone controls the behavior, meaning the learner can do it independently. Discrimination training teaches telling stimuli apart, shaping builds new behaviors, and FCT teaches communication to replace problem behavior. For example, fading physical prompts for writing lets the visual stimulus of the letters eventually control the writing behavior. Tip: fading equals moving control from the prompt to the real cue. Question 46. Which measurement system is best suited for behaviors that occur at very high rates and are difficult to count individually, or for behaviors that do not have a clear start and end? A. Event recording. B. Latency recording. C. Partial interval recording. D. Duration recording. Answer: C. Partial interval recording. This question asks for a suitable measurement system for challenging behaviors, those that are very fast or continuous. Event recording is difficult for high-rate behaviors. Latency measures time to start, not frequency or occurrence within time. Duration measures how long, which may not be feasible if it's continuous or lacks clear boundaries. Partial interval recording involves dividing the observation period into small intervals and recording whether the behavior occurred at any point during that interval. This is useful for high-rate behaviors because you don't need to count each instance, just note if it happened. It often overestimates duration but provides a useful index of occurrence. For example, if tracking hand flapping, you might check every 10 seconds and mark yes if it occurred at all during that 10-second window. Remember? Partial interval equals did it happen at all during the interval? Good for high-rate/continuous behaviors. Question 47. A behavior analyst is teaching a child to identify colors. They present a red card and ask, "What color?" The child says, "Red." The analyst praises the child. In this interaction, the question, "What color?" functions as the A. Consequence. B. Response. C. Discriminative stimulus, SD. D. Motivating operation, MO. Answer: C. Discriminative stimulus, SD. This question analyzes a discrete trial, asking you to identify the role of the analyst's question. The question, "What color?" is presented before the child's response, "Red," and signals that reinforcement, praise, is available for correctly naming the color of the presented red card. This fits the definition of a discriminative stimulus, SD, an antecedent stimulus that signals the availability of reinforcement for a specific response. The red card itself is also part of the SD complex. The child's utterance "red" is the response. The praise is the consequence. There's no clear MO mentioned, although wanting praise could be related to an MO. Think. The SD is the cue or instruction that sets the occasion for the response. Question 48. Behavior analysts have an ethical responsibility to recommend scientifically supported treatments. This aligns with which core ethical principle? A. Beneficence, doing good. B. Accepting responsibility. C. According dignity. D. Being truthful. Answer: A. Beneficence, doing good. This question connects ethical principles to practice standards. The responsibility to use scientifically supported treatments. Evidence-based practices is primarily derived from the principle of beneficence, which means acting in the best interest of the client and promoting their welfare. Using effective treatments maximizes the likelihood of positive outcomes and avoids wasting time or resources on ineffective or potentially harmful interventions. While other principles like responsibility, dignity, and truthfulness are related, the core drive to use effective methods stems from the obligation to do good for the client. Think, using proven methods is a key way we ensure we are helping, not harming, which is the essence of beneficence. Question 49. When reinforcement is delivered after an average number of responses, but the exact number varies from one time to the next, this describes which schedule of reinforcement. A. Fixed ratio, FR. B. Variable ratio, VR. C. fixed interval, FI. D. Variable interval, VI. Answer B. Variable ratio, VR. This question defines a specific schedule of reinforcement based on how reinforcement is delivered. The keywords are average number of responses and exact number varies. This perfectly describes a variable ratio, VR, schedule. Reinforcement is contingent on completing a number of responses, but that number changes unpredictably around an average. This schedule typically produces high and steady rates of responding because the learner never knows exactly which response will pay off. Slot machines are a classic example of VR schedules. FR requires a fixed number, phi requires a fixed time, and VI requires a variable time. Remember, variable equals unpredictable. Ratio equals responses. VR equals unpredictable number of responses. Question 50. Planning for generalization should ideally occur. A. After the skill has been fully mastered in the training setting. B. Only if the client fails to generalize spontaneously. C. From the very beginning of intervention planning. D. During the final phase of treatment, just before discharge. Answer C. From the very beginning of intervention planning. This question asks about the optimal timing for planning generalization strategies. Best practice in ABA emphasizes that generalization shouldn't be an afterthought. It should be actively planned for from the outset of treatment. Waiting until the skill is mastered in isolation, A, or until problems arise, B.D, makes successful generalization less likely. By considering generalization early, behavior analysts can incorporate strategies like teaching with multiple examples, in different settings, with different people, using natural cues and consequences, and training loosely right from the start. For example, if teaching greetings, plan from day one to practice with different people in various locations, not just the therapy room. Key takeaway: don't wait. Plan for generalization from the start. Question 51. Which type of preference assessment involves presenting pairs of stimuli and having the individual choose one from each pair? A. Single stimulus, successive choice. B. Paired stimulus, forced choice. C. Multiple stimulus with replacement, MSW. D. Multiple stimulus without replacement, MSWO. Answer B. Paired stimulus, forced choice. This question asks you to identify a specific preference assessment method based on its procedure. The defining characteristic is presenting pairs of stimuli and having the person choose one from each pair. This describes the paired stimulus preference assessment, sometimes called forced choice, because the individual must choose between the two presented options. Single stimulus presents items one at a time. MSW and MSWO present multiple items simultaneously, differing in whether the chosen item is replaced or removed for the next trial. The paired stimulus method is often considered more accurate than single stimulus because it requires discrimination and choice. Think. Paired equals two at a time. Question 52. The analytic dimension of ABA. Bear, Wolf, and Risley, 1968. Requires A. Describing procedures clearly enough for replication. B. Focusing on socially significant behaviors. C. Demonstrating experimental control over the behavior. D. Using procedures derived from basic behavioral principles. Answer C. Demonstrating experimental control over the behavior. This question asks for the definition of the analytic dimension of ABA. This dimension emphasizes the need to show convincingly that the intervention, independent variable, was responsible for the change in behavior, dependent variable. That is, demonstrating a functional relationship. This is typically done using single-subject research designs where conditions are manipulated to show control. Option A is technological, B is applied, and D is conceptually systematic. Being analytic means being able to show, through data, that your intervention caused the change. Remember, Analytic equals analysis equals proving cause and effect. Question 53. A stimulus change that occurs after a behavior and increases the future frequency of that behavior is called A. A prompt. B. An antecedent. C. Reinforcement. D. Punishment. Answer: C. Reinforcement. This question provides the functional definition of reinforcement. The keywords are after a behavior, consequence, and increases the future frequency. Any stimulus change that follows a behavior and makes that behavior more likely to happen again in the future fits the definition of reinforcement. A prompt is an antecedent cue. An antecedent occurs before the behavior. Punishment decreases future frequency. For example, if a child shares a toy, behavior, and gets praised, stimulus change after behavior, and then shares more often in the future, the praise functioned as reinforcement. Simple tip. Reinforcement equals increases behavior. Question 54. Which of the following describes a potential unwanted effect of using punishment? A. Increased independence. B. Emotional and aggressive reactions. C. Improved stimulus discrimination. D. Establishment of conditioned reinforcers. Answer: B. Emotional and aggressive reactions. This question asks about the potential negative side effects associated with the use of punishment procedures. While punishment can decrease behavior, it can also lead to undesirable collateral effects. Emotional responses, like crying, fear, anxiety, and aggressive behavior towards the punishing agent or others, are well-documented potential side effects. Other potential issues include escape/avoidance behaviors, modeling of the punishing behavior, and overuse of punishment because it can be negatively reinforcing for the person delivering it. Increased independence, improved discrimination, and establishing conditioned reinforcers are generally positive outcomes associated with reinforcement or teaching procedures. Key takeaway: punishment can work, but it comes with risks, including emotional and aggressive side effects. Question 55. Non-contingent reinforcement, NCR, involves delivering reinforcers. A. Contingent on the absence of the problem behavior. B. Contingent on the occurrence of a specific alternative behavior. C. On a time-based schedule, independent of the client's behavior. D. Only after the client has emitted a large number of responses. Answer: C. On a time-based schedule, independent of the client's behavior. This question asks for the definition of non-contingent reinforcement, NCR. The key phrase is independent of the client's behavior. In NCR, reinforcers known to maintain the problem behavior are delivered freely according to a set time schedule. Example: attention every 5 minutes, access to a toy every 10 minutes, regardless of what the client is doing at that moment. The goal is to break the contingency between the problem behavior and the reinforcer by providing the reinforcer so frequently that the client doesn't need to engage in the problem behavior to get it. Option A describes DRO, B describes DRA/DRI, and D describes a ratio schedule. Think: non-contingent equals not contingent on behavior, delivered based on time. Question 56. A behavior analyst collects data on the number of times a student requests help during math class each day for a week. What dimension of behavior is being measured? A. Latency. B. Duration. C. Frequency or rate if time is specified. D. Interresponse time, IRT. Answer: C. Frequency or rate if time is specified. This question asks you to identify the behavioral dimension being measured based on the data collection description. The analyst is counting the number of times the behavior, requesting help, occurs. This is a measure of frequency. If the observation time, example, the length of math class, is consistent or specified, this count can also be converted into rate, frequency per unit of time. Latency measures time to start, duration measures how long it lasts, and IRT measures time between responses. Since the analyst is simply counting occurrences, frequency is the direct dimension measured. Remember, frequency equals how many times. Question 57. The behavioral dimension of ABA. Bear, Wolf, and Risley, 1968, emphasizes that behavior must be A. Socially significant. B. Observable and measurable. C. Changed using established principles. D. Able to generalize to new environments. Answer: B. Observable and measurable. This question asks for the definition of the behavioral dimension of ABA. This dimension requires that the focus of study and intervention must be the behavior itself, what the person does, and that this behavior must be defined in objective terms so it can be reliably observed and measured. Vague terms or internal states that cannot be directly observed are generally avoided as primary targets. Option A is applied, C relates to conceptually systematic, and D relates to generality. For example, instead of targeting frustration, a behavioral approach would target observable actions like hitting the table, yelling, or ripping paper. Key: behavioral equals focus on what people do and make sure you can see it and count it. Question 58. A child learns to say dog when they see a picture of a dog. Later, they see a real dog in the park and say dog. This is an example of A. Response generalization. B. Stimulus generalization. C. Rule-governed behavior. D. Maintenance. Answer: B. Stimulus generalization. This question describes a situation where a learned response occurs in the presence of a new similar stimulus. The child learned the response, dog, to one stimulus, picture of a dog, and then emitted the same response to a different but related stimulus, real dog. This spreading of the response to other stimuli is called stimulus generalization. Response generalization would be if the child saw the dog and said something similar but different, like doggy or puppy. Rule-governed behavior involves following instructions or rules. Maintenance refers to the behavior persisting over time. Think: the stimulus changed, picture to real dog, but the response stayed the same, stimulus generalization. Question 59. Which ethical guideline requires behavior analysts to involve clients and stakeholders in the planning process and obtain their approval before implementing or modifying services? A. Maintaining confidentiality. B. Assessing behavior. C. Informed consent. D. Treatment efficacy. Answer: C. Informed consent. This question asks about the ethical requirement for client involvement and approval. The keywords involve clients and stakeholders, planning process, and obtain their approval all point directly to the principle of informed consent. This involves ensuring that clients, or their surrogates, understand the proposed services, potential risks and benefits, alternative options, and their right to refuse or withdraw, and then voluntarily agree to proceed. Confidentiality relates to privacy, assessing behavior relates to data collection methods, and treatment efficacy relates to using effective procedures. Informed consent ensures collaboration and respects the client's autonomy. Remember, consent means getting permission after providing full information. Question 60. You are teaching a client to make their bed. You prompt them through all the steps except the last one, pulling the comforter up, which they do independently. Then you reinforce them. The next day, you prompt all steps except the last two, smoothing the pillow and pulling up the comforter. This procedure is called A. Forward chaining. B. Backward chaining. C. Total task presentation. D. Shaping. Answer: B. Backward chaining. This scenario describes a specific method for teaching a multi-step task. The key is that the teaching starts with the last step being performed independently for reinforcement, then the last two steps, and so on, working backward from the end of the chain. This is the definition of backward chaining. Forward chaining teaches the first step first. Total task presentation involves prompting the learner through all steps on each trial. Shaping reinforces approximations of a single behavior, not steps in a sequence. Since you started by having the client independently complete only the final step, it's backward chaining. Tip: backward chaining equals master the end first, then work backward. Question 61. If a behavior occurs more frequently during the attention condition of a functional analysis compared to other conditions, the hypothesized function is A. Escape/avoidance, B. Automatic reinforcement, C. Access to tangibles, D. Social positive reinforcement, attention. Answer: D. Social positive reinforcement, attention. This question asks you to interpret the results of a functional analysis. FA. Condition. The critical information is that the behavior is highest during the attention condition. In a standard FA, the attention condition typically involves the therapist being present but ignoring the client until the target behavior occurs, at which point brief attention, like a comment or reprimand, is provided. If the behavior increases specifically in this condition, it strongly suggests the behavior is maintained by attention from others, which is a form of social positive reinforcement. Escape is tested in the demand condition, automatic in the alone condition, and tangibles in the tangible condition. Remember, high rates in the attention condition equals attention function. Question 62. A board-certified behavior analyst, BCBA, is required to supervise registered behavior technicians, RBTs, they oversee. This supervision must include activities like direct observation, feedback, and reviewing data. These requirements relate primarily to which section of the ethical code? A. Responsibility to clients. B. Responsibility to the profession. C. Responsibility as a supervisor. D. Responsibility in research. Answer: C. Responsibility as a supervisor. This question concerns the ethical obligations specific to the role of a supervisor. The keywords supervise registered behavior technicians, direct observation, feedback, and reviewing data clearly fall under the ethical responsibilities outlined for BCBAs acting in a supervisory capacity example, Section 4.0 in the Professional and Ethical Compliance Code, or Section 5 in the Ethics Code for Behavior Analysts. While supervision ultimately benefits clients, A, and upholds professional standards, B, the specific rules and guidelines governing the supervisory relationship itself are detailed in the section dedicated to supervision. Think, if the question is about overseeing others, RBTs, BCABAs, trainees, look for the supervision section of the code. Question 63. A graph shows data points tightly clustered around a horizontal line, with little bounce or variability. This indicates A. High variability, low level. B. Low variability, stable level. C. Increasing trend, high variability. D. Decreasing trend, low level. Answer: B. Low variability, stable level. This question asks you to interpret a visual pattern on a graph. Data points tightly clustered means there isn't much bounce or spread between the points. This indicates low variability. Around a horizontal line means the data points are not generally increasing or decreasing. They are staying around the same average value. This indicates a stable level, no trend. Therefore, the description matches low variability and a stable level. High variability would mean points are spread out. An increasing or decreasing trend would show a general upward or downward slope. Tip: tight cluster equals low variability. Horizontal equals stable level. Question 64. Providing reinforcement for emitting a behavior at or below a predetermined rate is called A. Differential reinforcement of other behavior. DRO. B. Differential reinforcement of alternative behavior. DRA. C. Differential reinforcement of low rates of responding. DRL. D. Differential reinforcement of high rates of responding. DRH. Answer C. Differential reinforcement of low rates of responding, DRL. This question defines a specific differential reinforcement procedure focused on reducing, but not eliminating, a behavior. The key phrase is at or below a predetermined rate. This describes differential reinforcement of low rates, DRL. DRL is used when the behavior is acceptable or even necessary at low rates, but problematic at high rates. Example, asking questions in class. Reinforcement is given if the frequency of the behavior during a specified period is below a certain criterion. DRL reinforces absence, DRA reinforces a replacement, and DR reinforces high rates. Think. DRL equals reinforcing less of the behavior. Question 65. What is the term for the reappearance of a behavior after it has been reduced through extinction, even though extinction is still in effect? A. Extinction burst. B. Resurgence. C. Spontaneous recovery. D. Response generalization. Answer C. Spontaneous recovery. This question asks for the term describing the temporary return of an extinguished behavior. The key elements are reappearance of a behavior after it has been reduced through extinction, and extinction is still in effect. This phenomenon is known as spontaneous recovery. It's typically temporary, and the behavior will decrease again if extinction procedures continue to be applied, i.e., reinforcement is still withheld. An extinction burst is the initial increase when extinction starts. Resurgence involves the return of a different previously extinguished behavior. Response generalization involves variations in the form of the response. Tip. Spontaneous recovery equals the behavior spontaneously pops back up for a bit after extinction seemed successful. Question 66. Which of the following constitutes a potential conflict of interest for a behavior analyst? A. Receiving a referral from a satisfied client's parent. B. Accepting a small holiday gift, example, a $10 coffee card, from a client's family. C. Entering into a romantic relationship with a current client's parent. D. Attending the same community event as a client family by chance. Answer C. Entering into a romantic relationship with a current client's parent. This question asks you to identify a situation that represents a conflict of interest, specifically a dual relationship that could impair objectivity or exploit the other party. Entering into a romantic relationship with a client or a close relative of the client, like a parent, creates a significant dual relationship and conflict of interest, which is explicitly prohibited by the BCBA ethics code while the professional relationship exists, and often for a period afterward. Receiving referrals. A. Is generally acceptable if handled ethically. Accepting small, inexpensive gifts. B. May be permissible depending on context and agency policy, but larger gifts can be problematic. Incidental contact. D. Is usually unavoidable and not inherently unethical if boundaries are maintained. Key. Romantic/close personal relationships with clients or their immediate family are clear ethical violations due to the high potential for conflict of interest and exploitation. Question 67. When a previously neutral stimulus acquires the ability to elicit a response because it has been paired with an unconditioned stimulus or a conditioned stimulus, this process is called A. Operant conditioning. B. Respondent, classical, conditioning. C. Stimulus discrimination. D. Response generalization. Answer B. Respondent, classical, conditioning. This question describes the process by which neutral stimuli come to evoke responses through association. The keywords are neutral stimulus acquires the ability to elicit a response, and paired with an unconditioned stimulus. This is the definition of respondent conditioning, also known as classical or Pavlovian conditioning. It deals with reflexes and elicited responses. Operant conditioning involves learning through consequences, reinforcement, and punishment that affect voluntary behavior. Stimulus discrimination and response generalization are concepts within operant conditioning. For example, Pavlov's dogs learned to salivate, response to a bell, conditioned stimulus, because the bell was repeatedly paired with food, unconditioned stimulus. Tip. Respondent conditioning equals learning through pairing/association, often involving reflexes. Question 68. A behavior analyst wants to determine if their intervention is responsible for the observed change in behavior. They implement the intervention, see a change, remove the intervention, return to baseline, and see the behavior revert, then re-implement the intervention and see the change again. Which experimental design is being used? A. Multiple baseline design. B. Changing criterion design. C. Alternating treatments design. D. Reversal ABAB design. Answer D. Reversal ABAB design. This question describes the sequence of phases in a specific experimental design. The sequence described: baseline, A. Intervention, B. Return to baseline, A. Return to intervention. B is the hallmark of a reversal or ABAB design. This design demonstrates experimental control by showing that the behavior changes systematically when the intervention is applied and withdrawn. Multiple baseline introduces the intervention sequentially across baselines. Changing criterion changes the performance goal over time. Alternating treatments rapidly alternates conditions. Think. ABAB equals on, off, on again, reversing conditions to show control. Question 69. The conceptually systematic dimension of ABA. Bear, Wolf, and Risley, 1968, requires that procedures are: A. Described clearly for replication. B. Effective in changing behavior. C. Related to or derived from the basic principles of behavior analysis. D. Focused on observable and measurable behavior. Answer C. Related to or derived from the basic principles of behavior analysis. This question asks for the definition of the conceptually systematic dimension. This dimension means that the procedures used in ABA should be linked back to the fundamental principles from which they were derived: example, reinforcement, punishment, extinction, stimulus control. Interventions shouldn't be just a collection of random tricks. They should fit within the coherent framework of behavior analysis. Option A is technological, B is effective, and D is behavioral. Using terms like positive reinforcement or extinction correctly and explaining interventions based on these principles demonstrates that the approach is conceptually systematic. Tip: conceptually systematic equals tied back to the basic concepts/principles of ABA. Question 70. Which verbal operant involves a speaker naming things and actions in the environment, prompted by a nonverbal stimulus? A. Mand. B. Tact. C. Echoic. D. Intraverbal. Answer B. Tact. This question asks you to identify a specific verbal operant based on its controlling variables. The key elements are naming things and actions, and being prompted by a nonverbal stimulus, something the speaker sees, hears, smells, touches, or tastes. This is the definition of a tact, essentially labeling or commenting on the environment. A mand is a request, controlled by an MO. An echoic is repeating what someone else says, controlled by a verbal stimulus with point-to-point correspondence. An intraverbal is like conversational speech or answering questions, controlled by a verbal stimulus without point-to-point correspondence. For example, seeing a cat and saying cat is a tact. Think. Tact equals contact with the environment through the senses. Question 71. During a preference assessment, an item selected by the individual is removed from the array for subsequent trials. This describes which specific method? A. Single stimulus. B. Paired stimulus. C. Multiple stimulus with replacement, MSW. D. Multiple stimulus without replacement, MSWO. Answer D. Multiple stimulus without replacement, MSWO. This question focuses on the procedural details, differentiating multiple stimulus preference assessments. The key information is that the item selected is removed from the array for subsequent trials. This defines the multiple stimulus without replacement (MSWO) procedure. In MSWO, the individual chooses one item from an array. That item is given to them briefly, and then it is not put back into the array for the next trial. This continues until all items are chosen or the person stops choosing, creating a ranked list of preferences. In MSW, the chosen item is replaced, put back, in the array. Single stimulus presents one item at a time, and paired stimulus presents two at a time. Tip: without replacement equals chosen item is taken out. Question 72. A behavior analyst ensures that data collection procedures are implemented consistently and accurately as intended across observers and time. This relates to ensuring the blank of measurement. A. Validity. B. Reliability. C. Plausibility. D. Reactivity. Answer: B. Reliability. This question asks about a fundamental aspect of good measurement, ensuring that procedures are implemented consistently and accurately across observers, related to IOA, and time points to the concept of reliability. Reliability refers to the consistency and stability of the measurement system, yielding the same values upon repeated measurement of the same event. Validity, A, refers to whether the measurement system actually measures what it claims to measure. Plausibility, C, isn't a standard measurement term. Reactivity, D, refers to changes in behavior due to being observed. Consistent and accurate implementation is key to having reliable data. Think: reliable equals repeatable, consistent. Question 73. Which of the following is the best example of a behavior defined in observable and measurable terms? A. Showing frustration. B. Being aggressive towards peers. C. Throwing objects onto the floor. D. Feeling angry. Answer: C. Throwing objects onto the floor. This question requires you to identify a behavioral definition that meets the criteria of being observable and measurable, consistent with the behavioral dimension of ABA. Option C, throwing objects onto the floor, describes a specific observable action. Anyone could see this happen and count how many times it occurs. Options A, frustration, and D, feeling angry, describe internal states or emotions, which are not directly observable. Option B, being aggressive, is better than A or D, but still somewhat broad, defining the specific forms of aggression, like hitting, kicking, or throwing objects, is necessary for clear measurement. Option C is the most objective and unambiguous description of an action. Remember, good definitions describe actions you can see and count. Question 74. The phenomenon where a behavior that has been maintained on an intermittent schedule of reinforcement is more resistant to extinction than a behavior maintained on a continuous schedule is known as: A. Behavioral contrast. B. The partial reinforcement extinction effect, PRE. C. Stimulus over selectivity. D. Matching law. Answer: B. The partial reinforcement extinction effect, PRE. This question describes a well-established principle related to schedules of reinforcement and extinction. The key concept is that behavior reinforced intermittently, partially, not every time, persists longer during extinction than behavior reinforced continuously, every time. This is called the partial reinforcement extinction effect, PRE. It means that if you sometimes get reinforced for a behavior, you'll keep trying longer when the reinforcement stops altogether, compared to if you were used to getting reinforced every single time. Behavioral contrast refers to changes in behavior rate in one setting when conditions change in another setting. Stimulus over selectivity is focusing on only one aspect of a stimulus. The matching law relates response allocation to reinforcement rates. Think: partial reinforcement makes the behavior tougher and harder to extinguish. Question 75. An RBT notices that their client seems to have learned a new skill faster than expected based on the behavior plan. The RBT decides to modify the teaching procedure slightly to make it more challenging without consulting the supervising BCBA. According to the BACB ethics codes, this action is A. Appropriate as the RBT is adapting to the client's progress. B. Inappropriate as modifications to the plan require supervisor approval. C. Appropriate only if the RBT documents the change carefully. D. Inappropriate only if the change results in slower progress. Answer: B. Inappropriate, as modifications to the plan require supervisor approval. This question addresses the scope of practice and supervisory relationship for RBTs. RBTs work under the close, ongoing supervision of a BCBA or BCABA and are responsible for implementing the behavior plan as designed by the supervisor. While RBTs provide valuable information about client progress, they are not authorized to make independent modifications to the intervention plan. Any changes, even seemingly small ones or those intended to benefit the client, must be discussed with and approved by the supervising BCBA. Making unauthorized changes, options of C, D, violates the supervisory requirements and ethical guidelines regarding competence and responsibility. Key takeaway: RBTs implement, supervisors design and modify. Always consult your supervisor before changing the plan.